Hello everyone, I'm Inverse, and on today's episode of StratTalk, we're going to take a look at playing from behind. Now, this isn't a traditional StratTalk episode, and what I mean by that is we're not going to be talking about any sort of strategy per se. Rather, we're going to be looking at the mindset you need to be in when you're playing at a disadvantage, and how that needs to affect how you play and how you think about how you should be playing. Now, in order to help us with this discussion, we're going to be taking a look at a game from the most recent Sunday Night Fights Season 4 qualifier tournament that took place. It'd be a week ago, almost a week ago now. It's a round 3 game between DevM, down here is the American player, and his Wehrmacht opponent Lollipop. Now, this is a game between two fairly high-skilled players on a fairly balanced map in a tournament scenario. And as we're going to see very shortly, a few things are going to go wrong. Actually, a few more than a few things are going to go wrong. And it begs a question, what exactly does it take to win a game when you're already losing it? That's a question that is often asked, especially when you look at players who are newer, who are trying to learn, and who post replays or even ask for assistance and say, hey, I'm not really sure what I should have done, I'm not really sure how I should have reacted, hey, I know I made some mistakes, but I played things out normally from then on, why didn't anything work out the way I wanted it to work out? And the only real answer to that is it's not going to work out if you keep the same mentality you would keep if you were playing a standard, normal, straight-up game. And that's something that if you like watching my stuff, if you like watching my stream, it's something you don't really hear too often. Hey, do something different, do something a little strange. Because I'm sure you guys are probably sick of hearing me say it and sick of watching me talk about, you want to play consistently, you want to play in a stable fashion because that's the most consistent way to play, and it is. But you can't adhere to something like that when you're already at a disadvantage. Playing consistently and playing in a stable fashion is only really effective when you're able to stay on par with your opponent, when you're able to keep on top of them economically, or at least keep even with them economically. When you're playing from an economical disadvantage, meaning, hey, maybe you've lost a squad, maybe you've lost 2 squads, maybe you've lost a lot of manpower from a flank, you're not really going to be able to win, or at least win easily or strongly, unless your opponent makes mistakes to the magnitude of the mistakes you've made. And a lot of the time, if you're playing against players who are perhaps less skilled than you, or maybe of equal skills, you can often play a very passive game, a very careful and patient game, and draw things out and make good decisions, and actually come out ahead playing in that kind of manner, by playing very calmly, by taking your time, by waiting for your opponent to make mistakes, and when your opponent does make mistakes, capitalizing on those mistakes. On the other hand, against a player who's perhaps equally skilled at a higher level or even better than you, if you get behind, you can't really count on your opponent making mistakes. It's not really a reliable thing to do, and it's not a reliable way to win games, especially when you're behind. When you're behind, you're already at a disadvantage. By playing in a safe, standard way, you're not opening yourself up to any further disadvantage, but you're not doing anything to close the gap between your situation and your opponent's situation. Because when you're behind, your opponent is in a better position than you are. And that's something you need to rectify, because against weaker players, they might fix it for you. They might screw up, they might give you an opportunity to come back. Against good players, even players equal to you in skill, definitely players better than you, you're not going to have those opportunities given to you. You need to take them. You need to force situations like that, and you need to do your best to recover in a way that puts you in control and doesn't put your opponent in control, because you always want to be in control. You want to be in control of your game as much as you possibly can, because if you're not in control, you're not ever going to be consistent. Even when you're behind, you need to be in control of what you want to do and what you can do. Now, as we see right now, talking about the specifics of this game, things are already going slightly downhill for Devim. He's lost his Jeep. You know, that's not too big a deal. He's gone 3 rifles with a Jeep and grenades. Now, as we see right here, he has his grenades right now. He's a little off sync with his attack. He has a rifle squad down here, a rifle squad pushing in that's taking a lot of damage, and a rifle squad down in this area right here. Now, he's actually going to lose this one rifle squad. So that's mistake number 2. He's already lost a Jeep, now he's also lost a rifle squad. Now he's coming in with a 3rd rifle squad, completely independent of any other units. He's got a flamer down here, sure, he's got another rifle squad down here. But we have a Wehrmacht player with 2 Volks, an MG, and a bike. Now right here we're going to have a really nice grenade go out. And this is kind of Devim's saving grace with this early game. Now he doesn't kill any Volks, he doesn't kill any units. He deals some significant manpower damage, but he's going to lose another rifle squad. Wait for it, wait for it. He is going to lose another rifle squad. He is. There, right there. Okay, so he's lost another rifle squad. He has a 2nd rifle squad now on the field that he had just built. He's going to rebuild a 3rd one because it's kind of difficult to play a game with 2 rifle squads. But it's what he does after this that's most interesting, and that I primarily want to discuss. Now, there's a few things that's going to change in Devim's game and in how Devim plays this game out from this point forward. Now, we can reasonably assume that the general plan for Devim in this situation, barring him losing those 2 rifle squads in that Jeep, the Jeep is an expendable asset. The Jeep can be lost. That's not a big deal. For him, that's not a big deal for most American players. 2 rifle squads, however, that's a huge investment. That's 540 manpower. That's a lot of manpower. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of time taken to rebuild. And that's one of the reasons we're only seeing 1 rebuilt rifle squad from Devim. Realistically, he's going to want to have 4 rifle squads at this situation. He's not going to want to be in the situation he is in right now, with 3 rifle squads, a couple of engineers, and just now getting his tech out. His tech's a little bit late. It's not too incredibly late, and the main reason for that was his neglecting to rebuild a 4th rifle squad. But his tech is late. He doesn't have a trio center, he doesn't have anything like that, which is something you would usually want to get with an early grenade opening. But what he's doing is he's around the map, he's capping away from his opponent, he's planting a lot of mines, and he's setting himself up for a mid-game that will allow him to get back into things. The main kind of alteration that I want to talk about is this decision to tech over rebuilding a 4th rifle squad. Because a lot of people, when they lose squads in the early game, a lot of American players aren't comfortable with playing an early game out with less than 4 rifle squads. 4 rifle squads is kind of, you know, it's the accepted wisdom that's what you want. It's the standard. Everyone likes 4 rifle squads. It gives you some decent mobility. It gives you an opportunity to move around the map and stuff like that and be aggressive. And that's all great. But you run into problems when you have 4 rifle squads, but you've lost a few. So you've had to rebuild 1 rifle squad. You've had to rebuild 2 rifle squads. And in that situation, your opponent has been able to get a huge leap forward in terms of tech, in terms of units, and in terms of fighting ability. We actually might... I don't remember if that squad dies. I don't think it dies. But there's a big discrepancy, a big variance in the amount of infantry and the amount of units a Wehrmacht player, or even an American player if you're playing from behind as the Wehrmacht, is going to be able to get relative to you. And infantry isn't a cost-effective unit. just period. You can be very cost effective with infantry, relatively speaking, but it's not a cost effective unit. You'll notice right here, look at these squads: 2-man squad, 2-man squad, 3-man squad, 1-man squad. That's a lot of manpower that has to be reinforced. Now that was a very effective attack. DevM killed a Volk squad, he pushed his Wehrmacht opponent off the map, and as we see right here, the reason for that was primarily because instead of capitalizing on DevM's reduction in units with an increased tier 1, Lollipop decided instead to tech to tier 2 and give himself a tech advantage over a unit advantage in the early game, which is perfectly acceptable, but that is why DevM was actually successful with this attack in the early game, or in the middle rather. But in terms of rebuilding infantry, it's not what you really want to be doing when you're behind, because it's not cost effective. It's very expensive flanking. You can do a lot of damage when you flank. You can win games, you can be very effective with your units when you flank, but it's going to cost you. You're going to spend a lot of manpower reinforcing. You're going to spend perhaps munitions on grenades. You're going to spend a lot of resources, and that's only going to widen the discrepancy between your situation. Enemy unit down. You know, I was watching this game before and I heard that, and I could not for the life of me figure out what it was that died. It's not the sniper. I know it's not the sniper. But what was I saying? I got completely sidetracked by that. Oh yeah. Rebuilding infantry. You're not going to get even with your opponent by rebuilding infantry, because infantry is great and all, but the more lopsided the engagement is, the less cost effective it becomes. You can't really micro against a vastly superior infantry force with infantry of your own. And if DevM had, instead of getting this M8 elected to tech up, or rather rebuild his rifle squads, he wouldn't have nearly the aggressive potential he has right now, because he would be fighting a superior infantry force with a whole lot of cost ineffective units. And the bigger the discrepancy between your infantry and your opponent's infantry, the quicker your opponent's infantry is going to be able to kill your infantry, and the less damage your infantry is going to be able to do to your opponent for the manpower cost that it's going to cost you, which is fairly substantial. Especially when you're already down, in this case, 2 rifle squads and a jeep. Now another thing that's very important is playing aggressively and not being afraid to take a chance here and there. You've got your cost-effective unit, you've got your M8. Oh yeah, that's another thing I wanted to talk about. I almost completely forgot this. Before we get on the aggression tip, this is a reason why almost always you see players who are behind go for one of two things. They go for an M8 or they go for a sniper. These are two units that are as cost effective as your micro allows them. If you micro correctly, 95% of the time you will not lose a sniper and you will not lose an M8. Especially on a map like Samoa where there's so much shot blocking cover. There's church, there's all these buildings in the middle, there's hedges. It's very easy for a good player to keep units like snipers and M8s alive for a very long period of time. And it's units like those that are going to narrow the gap between you and your opponent in terms of the manpower war and in terms of how much manpower you're spending and how much manpower your opponent's spending relative to how much you two have both lost. Because a sniper, obviously, is going to deal damage for as long as it is alive, and once you've invested that 340 manpower, you're not spending any more manpower, you're not reinforcing anything, you're not, well, you could technically be rebuilding it, but if you play correctly and you play cautiously, aggressively but cautiously, which is a very fine balance to achieve, and which requires a whole heck of a lot of practice and experience, but so, on the other hand, do most things in this game and in most RTS games. But however, it's that cost effectiveness that makes snipers, and that also makes M8s with their ability to be repaired and to constantly deal damage without really incurring any further manpower costs like you have with rifles and stuff like that, which no matter how much you invest in rifle upgrades and supplier upgrades and stuff like that, you're going to be spending a whole heck of a lot of manpower reinforcing these squads. Every single time you fight, you're going to be reinforcing, you're going to be forced to reinforce, and you're going to be forced to spend a lot of manpower on maintaining your units and not so much manpower on actually gaining units.
Our forces are taking casualties.
So at this situation, we see a little bit more of what I was talking about with the aggression, and I'll get back on that tip now. We actually lost a whole heck of a lot of rifle squads right there. You see, we're down to one rifle squad. Still have the M8. Our opponent is down to sniper now, and is very shortly going to be down a half track as well. But this is kind of what I'm talking about with being ultra aggressive when behind. It's not practical to play super passively with the shock units that you get out of whatever tech route you decide to go, be it a sniper or an M8. You can't really be passive. You can't really sit back and hope and wait for your opponent to come to you, because your opponent doesn't have to come to you. There's no incentive for your opponent in a favorable position to put himself out of position for the purposes of allowing you to kill his stuff. That just doesn't make sense. And a lot of players, most players in fact, aren't going to give you that opportunity. It's the onus in a situation such as this is on the player who's behind. It's on the player who has something that they need to fix, has an issue that they need to resolve. The issue in this case, of course, being hey, I've lost a lot of infantry. I've lost 4 rifle squads throughout the entirety of this game. Before we lost those 2 rifle squads, hey, I lost 2 rifle squads. That's a big deal against a player of Lollipop's caliber, who isn't going to leave losses like that unpunished, and isn't going to give you free units, give you free squads. It comes more down to being aggressive and dealing damage with the units that you have in as cost-effective manner as possible. And of course, with an M8, that's relatively easy. It does, however, take a confidence in your abilities to micro and in your knowledge of maps. You'll notice here, Devim doing an excellent job of using both the map terrain and his opponent's positioning to his advantage, trying to get as much usefulness out of his M8 as possible, already dealing a sizable amount of damage with the M8. But furthermore, being aggressive, and being aggressive to the point of being risky to a small degree. That first attack in the middle, hey, if Lollipop has a Gren squad with a Panzerschreck and maybe enough munitions on top of that to Faust once, that M8 might die in that situation, and the game might be over right there. It's very difficult to come back from losing your shock unit as well. And that's why you have to understand, when playing from behind, you're going to lose more often than you're going to win. The point is, you want to minimize those situations and give yourself the best possible opportunity to succeed despite your situation, and to succeed despite the technically poor situation that you're in at that particular moment. Which in this instance, Devim's not in a particularly good situation. He's done what he could with his units, with his infantry, and he's still doing what he can, but he's still behind. He's still in a tough spot, and he's trying to be as cost effective with the units, with his units as he can, but it's not difficult. And the point is, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be difficult, and even playing aggressively, playing with cost-effective units in mind, keeping these principles in mind while playing, you're still not necessarily going to win and going to come back from every single game that you were behind in, and every single game that you were losing, and every single game that you made mistakes in the early game. The point is giving yourself the best chance possible to actually make a run for a game that you may otherwise have already quit out of in any other situation, or maybe you just don't think you really have a chance, which is also fairly common, especially amongst newer players who get down a little bit and then realize, hey, I'm probably gonna lose. I need to get out of here. In a tournament game like this, you can't really do that. You don't really want to give your opponent a win that easily. And a lot of times on ladder as well, it's not something you necessarily should be getting in the habit of doing. Is this game's too hard. I'm just gonna leave. It's not a good way to learn. It's not a good way to improve. But of course, playing standard off of a extreme deficit is definitely not a what's the word I'm looking for? Not a complete brain fart. Let's watch the pretty artillery instead. Let's watch it explode while I remember what the hell it was I was talking about. Yeah, you don't really want to be playing normally, because you're not going to get anything out of that. You're not going to give yourself a fighting chance at coming back from the game, because your opponent's just going to keep building on his advantage and the advantages he gained in the early game, and just tack on, and it's going to come to a point where there's actually nothing you can really do, because your opponent's just built on his advantage time after time after time after time, and it just becomes hopeless. And that's I think why a lot of players just knee-jerk, whatever, I've lost this game, I'm gonna quit out. Because it definitely takes a different mentality, it takes a different mindset to play a game from behind and to stabilize a game that you perhaps feel is already lost. And that ties into something else I want to talk about, which is understanding when you can play a short game and when you need to be playing a long game. Playing from behind is a situation where you absolutely need to be playing for a longer game. In some situations, okay, I'm gonna clarify that, because the moment I said it, I was like, I can see how you would disagree, and I definitely feel there are areas where you can say, no, you probably want to play a quicker game in some situations. I would say personally, I feel that by playing a longer, more patient game, you give yourself more opportunities to make better decisions than your opponent, to take advantage of your micro, take advantage of your cost-effective units, and actually get what you need to get out of those units, and give yourself a better chance to come back by giving yourself a longer amount of time to actually use the units that you have. Of course, the counter argument, which is an argument that I absolutely see, is that the longer you play, the more time you give for your opponent to take whatever advantage he has and build upon it. Now, with that in mind, there's always the situation where your opponent's advantage is always greatest immediately after whatever event caused that advantage. So in this game, Lollipop had the strongest army relative to Devim the moment he killed those first two rifle squads. Now, sure, you can argue, hey, he had these squads back here that he had to reinforce, all that stuff. Regardless, the standing units he had on the field at that point in the game were largest between him and his opponent. The longer the game goes on, the smaller that gap gets in relation to the grand scheme of things, in relation to the entire army. 2 units is extremely huge when you only have 5 units on the field. 2 units becomes far less important when you have 12 units on the field. And that's the argument for playing a longer game, is you are going to be playing at a disadvantage, and you're going to have a disadvantage for a longer period of time. That's simply the nature of the situation. But what it's going to give you is more time to be able to normalize your disadvantage and equalize yourself in terms of positioning with your opponent, and more time for you to take advantage of the units and abilities that you have in order to actually outplay your opponent, in order to do a better job of using your units than your opponent. Because if you make a mistake in the early game and then your opponent outplays you through the late game, you're going to lose. That's just how it is. There's nothing you can really do about it. The only thing you can do about it in a situation like that is, hey, just don't make the mistakes. However, if you can put yourself in a situation where you give yourself opportunities to outplay your opponent, and by that I mean you give yourself units that you can micro, that you can use to out-micro your opponent, cost-effective units that you can use to deal damage to your opponent without taking damage yourself. M8s, artillery, snipers, things that have a one-time cost, but that are extremely difficult to kill, and that rely primarily on your micro. Those are things that give you opportunities to outplay your opponent. And if you just sit back, say you sit back, you build some rifle squads, you kind of react to what your opponent is doing. You're reacting to an opponent who's already ahead, and you're always going to be a step behind in that situation. You're never giving yourself a chance to outplay your opponent because you're saying, hey, I'm playing it safe. Hey, Inverse, that guy, he says you should play safe. You don't want to take chances if you don't have to. But what I'm trying to say is sometimes you do have to take chances. There are sometimes situations where you need to take risks, and you want to minimize those situations. You want to play as safely as you possibly can, because you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you have to make those chances or those decisions, and you have to take those chances. But there are situations and there are moments and there are times when that philosophy, it doesn't really apply, and it switches over from hey, I don't want to put myself in a bad situation to all right, I'm in a bad situation. This is what it is. I need to get out of this. I need to fix this. How am I going to do it? And if you decide, hey, I'm going to sit back and I'm going to see what my opponent is doing. If your opponent's not as good as you, hey, that's probably great, and that's probably fine, because you're going to be able to see, okay, this is what my opponent is doing. Let me react to this to the best of my ability and see what happens. I'm going to be able to outplay my opponent. How did you die? How did you die? I don't understand this. I was watching this game twice before. He just dies. This dude doesn't have an infantry kill. Maybe it's this guy. I don't know. He just flipping dies. What was I saying? This is twice I've been sidetracked, but this game was so mind-blowingly crazy. I didn't understand that either. What was I saying? Oh yeah. If your opponent is not as good as you, and if you're confident, like, hey, if I buckle down, I'm patient, I take my time, I'm gonna be able to outplay opponent. I'm gonna be able to outplay my opponent if I just play smart from this point forward. Hey, if you're a better player, a lot of the time that's great. That's going to work. That's going to give you a lot of success in those situations. But in the situation where you can't rely on your opponent being the one to make the mistake. You need to force the mistake. There was a great quote from Aimstrong posting on the forums, and said something along the lines of someone talking to him about, all these wins you post in this replay pack. It's your opponents playing terribly. I mean, these are really good players, but every game you have in here, they just play terribly. What does this say about, like, why should I think that these strategies in this replay pack actually work? Because it's against such low level, relatively speaking, low level play. And his response was something I really liked, and it was, good players force their opponents to make mistakes. And it makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Because hey, what happens? You as a player, are trying to beat a player who is also trying to beat you. How do you do that when you're both strategically sound? At this level that we're talking about, this game, it doesn't come down to, oh man, like you were just going tier 3 and I didn't realize it, so I didn't have AT. It very rarely comes down to a situation like that. Players are going to have the units and abilities and resources they need to win a game 90-95% of the time. With that in mind, it comes down to, hey, how am I using these units that I have? And it's beyond playing the game. It's about forcing mistakes out of your opponent. It's about forcing your opponent to play a certain way and taking advantage of that fact.
Battalion reinforcements standing by.
And a lot of the time, if you're looking at a good player's games, that comes down to making your opponents do things that they might not normally do, because hey, it's an unnatural situation, it's an unnatural level of pressure, it's an unnatural level of play. It's a difficult concept to describe. I encourage you guys to, I believe it was on the American strategy forums on Game Replays somewhere, this post by Aim Strong, if you seek it out and wish to learn, I greatly encourage you to do so. But what it's something that is important to keep in mind in any situation where hey, you're at a ridiculous disadvantage. How are you gonna pull yourself out of this hole? We've already gone over, you can't really rely on your opponent, at least an equally skilled opponent, to make mistakes. So what do? You force mistakes. You play in such a way that you force your opponent to make difficult decisions, and you rely on your ability to make superior decisions in those same superior decisions in those same situations. And that's a very important quality to have, and it's a very important thing to keep in mind when you're trying to improve and when you're trying to get into the mindset that you need to be in order to be a successful competitor and in order to have success at this game that's extremely difficult. It's an extremely difficult thing to win consistently with the variables and the crazy nonsense that can go on in any Company of Heroes game or in any RTS game, and with the amount of time some players have put into this game, it's very difficult to find a player at a high level of play who isn't strategically sound. It comes down a lot less to what you built in what situations than it does to how you use those units you build. And it's for that reason that there's all these cost-effective units that players of a higher skill level are going to be more inclined to use, because it puts the onus on them as the player and off of their opponents making mistakes. Because hey, if you are in a situation where you're trying to win as often as possible, you don't want to be putting yourself in a situation where maybe I'll win, if my opponent screws up, that'd be nice, and then I could win. You don't want that. You don't want to be in that situation. You want to be, hey, I'm going to screw up. You need to accept that fact, because it's true, you're going to screw up. But once you've screwed up, how am I going to give myself the best chance possible to come back and to win the game, and to give myself an opportunity to win the game? And I feel like I've been babbling a lot about the same general concepts. It's a very technically simple philosophy, but I guess the main point of this whole episode, because I was watching the Sunday Night Fight games, the replay pack is over on co2.org, coh2.org, if anyone's interested in checking out the games from the qualifier tournament. And I was just watching the games, and I knew Devin beat Lollipop 2-0. And I was watching this first game, and I'm like, hey, what's up with this? He's lost a Jeep. Okay, that's fine. Wait a minute. He just lost. He flanked with the grenades upgrade, and he lost 2 rifle squads. What's going on here? But I knew he won, so I was very intrigued, and watching the game kind of got me thinking. I don't know. It's an interesting thing to think about, because it's something that so few players do very well, and I truly believe this is something, or this is the main thing that sets the good players apart from the great players, and sets the champions, the tournament caliber champions, apart from the good ladder players who, you know, they can win their 5 out of 6 games against level 15 to 16 players on the ladder, and they can, you know, they do a pretty good job. If they lose a game, they don't really think about, you know, maybe I could have done things a little bit better, because it's not as important. It's not as important on ladder to think about, hey, I need to be consistent in this regard, because if I'm playing a tournament game, if I'm playing a tournament series, I can't give my opponent anything. I can't give my opponent free wins. I can't give my opponent just this situation in general. And how do I rectify such a situation? How do I come back, and how do I flip a disadvantage and turn it into an advantage? And it's an interesting thing to think about, because it's so incredibly difficult. So few players can actually do something like that with a high degree of proficiency, and I think DevM's one of the few that can actually do an extremely good job of knowing what units he needs to build in order to outplay his opponent, and then using those units to the best of his ability. And that just kind of that spawned the idea for this episode, because I do think it's an important aspect of the game that not a lot of people think about. Hey, I'm losing. What do I need to do? A lot of people just say, oh, I'm just gonna play. You know, I'll play normally, and if my opponent screws up, or if I play well, then hey, I'll come back. But this game's probably lost, so I'm not gonna try too hard. And the mentality of a player like Devin, the mentality of a player who's trying to win tournaments, who's trying to win literally every single game they play. Not you know, I'm happy with winning 80% of the games I play. I'm happy with winning a vast majority of the games I play. That doesn't win tournaments. Winning tournaments is winning literally almost every single game you play. And in order to have that consistency, you're gonna make mistakes. And Devin made mistakes early in this game. I'm sure every one of you watching has made mistakes. I've made mistakes. It's impossible to play without making mistakes. But there's a big difference between a player who takes those mistakes and tries to eliminate them, and a player who takes those mistakes and accepts them for what they are, and just whatever. It's gonna happen. There's nothing I can really do about it. I'm just gonna play better next time. Because when you're in a best of 3 series and you're playing against a player who's extremely good, you can't realistically say, you know, I got an 80-90% chance that I'm going to beat this guy in a single game. That doesn't happen with really good players. You have maybe a 60-70% chance max with 2 players at this high skill level. Every single game matters. Every single game counts. Every single game is extremely and vitally important. And it's very revealing when you look at how a player of that caliber responds to situations like we saw in this video, and a lesser player might just brush it off and might say, you know, it's not that big a deal. And in reality, it's something it doesn't take any technically more difficulty, any more skill, quote unquote, to do. It just takes a different mentality and a different mindset, and it's foreign to a lot of people, because a lot of people, you know, you play the games, you do the best that you can, and you hope for the best. And and it's not necessarily always the best way to go about things. And I hope with this strategy, or with this video rather, you guys will hopefully look at things a little bit differently, look at how you think about and play the game a little bit differently, and that's all I can really ask for. So thanks for watching, guys. As always, I do appreciate you watching, and I appreciate any comments, questions, anything like that. I read all the comments. I do my best to respond to quality, intelligent comments, so please do post them up if you have any, and any questions as well. And check out Sunday Night Fights, which is every Sunday at, I believe, 6 p.m. GMT, which on my side of the pond, being from the West Coast, is 10 a.m. And I believe that's 1 p.m. on the East Coast of the Americas. Yeah, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will be back in some time with something else. See ya.